This is Damon Fordham, professor of history at Virginia College and local author and historian. Now, there's been a really stupid story that's been spread on the internet and even in some documentaries over the last couple of years that before George Washington there was a black man named John Hanson who was the first president before George Washington. Come on. In the 1700s, the black people couldn't even vote by and large. So how could a man be president of a country that didn't even allow him to vote? That story was dismissed as a bunch of nonsense, and deservedly so, in American Legacy, an African American history magazine, in its fall 2001 issue. But what was real and what is truly inspiring is this. During the Reconstruction era that lasted after the Civil War, roughly between about 1867 or so up until 1876, there was a period where you did have a lot of African American leadership within the United States, especially in the South. You see, back after the end of slavery, you had the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendments. You see, this picture is from my book, Voices of Black South Carolina, Legend and Legacy. These men were a group of early African American members of the United States Senate. And there was a time when that picture used to be in many black homes. And a lot of states, after the passing of these amendments that allowed African Americans to vote, elected representatives and senators, and in a couple of cases, governors and lieutenant governors. Louisiana had Pinckney B.S. Pinchback in 1873 to serve as an interim governor after one of the governors was ousted for corruption, and before they could elect another governor, Pinchback served as the interim governor. They also elected Oscar Dunn in Louisiana as the lieutenant governor. Here in South Carolina, we elected a really interesting fellow to serve as the lieutenant governor. This African-American gentleman's name was Alonzo J. Ransier, and here is his picture coming right up here. Here you go. This picture can be found in several institutions in South Carolina. Mr. Ransier's picture, if you go to the Wells Fargo Bank in Goose Creek, South Carolina off Highway 52, you'll see this picture hanging in a mural at the bank there. Many people pass it all the time without realizing the significance of this man. But anyway, here's his story. Alonzo J. Ransier was born in 1834, and it is believed that he is descended from some of the Haitians who came here after the Haitian Revolution liberated that country. And he grew up as a free black person in one of the underground schools that was held for free African Americans during that period in Charleston. In those days, of course, it was illegal to teach black people to read and write, but you had a number of clandestine schools where many free children were taught, and these people went on to assume leadership positions in the African American community after slavery. Well, in 1865, after the end of slavery, they had conventions in South Carolina with the freed people to determine the new condition of their status. And in 1868, there was a convention held in Charleston where 76 blacks and 43 whites gathered together to form a new state constitution that would be based on equality. On March the 4th, 1868, they discussed the condition of the schools. And Alonzo Ransier made this following speech in regard to education in the state of South Carolina. Now keep in mind that prior to this there was no public education. The idea of that came from the great Robert Smalls of Beaufort, the gentleman who liberated the ship Planter, as I spoke about in an earlier video. But anyway, this is what Alonzo Ransier had to say about education and the causes of the Civil War that had just ended. If there's any one thing that which we may attribute the sufferings endured by this people, it is the gross ignorance of the masses. While we propose to avoid all difficulties which may be fraught with aid to the community, we shall nonetheless insist upon our right to provide for the exercise of the great moral agencies which education always brings to bear upon public opinion. In other words, he said if the people were better educated, they wouldn't have fallen for the kind of stuff that led to the Civil War in the first place. Something to think about. Well, not too long after the convention, there was one of its leaders, a man named Benjamin Franklin Randolph. a free black man who came down from Pennsylvania. And he made a lot of bold speeches in regards to the rights of African Americans to vote, as well as education. But he was killed by a group of assassins near Abbeville, South Carolina, later in 1868. This is what Alonzo J. Ransier had to say about this assassination. I share with you the feeling of indignation, which uncontrolled would lead me to seek vengeance by retaliation. But bear and forbear. The day of our political deliverance is hand. Let not these outrages intimidate you or lead you to measures of retaliation by which possibly the innocent may suffer along with the guilty. Well, a couple of years later, after the passage of the 15th Amendment, Alonzo Ransier was elected Lieutenant Governor of the state of South Carolina, making him the second Lieutenant Governor after Oscar Dunn of Louisiana. And he served 2 years in that position and then was elected to the House of Representatives. And one of the things that he tried to do was establish a civil rights bill in 1875 that would have, long before the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 or the Brown versus Board of Education, make integration a fact of public life. Basically, this is what he had to say about that. Let the doors of the public school be thrown open to all alike. If you mean to give these people equal rights at all, or to protect them in the exercise of the rights and privileges attaching to all freemen and citizens of their country, please pass this bill. Well, the bill passed, and it made discrimination illegal throughout public life, except for churches, schools, and cemeteries. But it was a start. Unfortunately, the year after that, Reconstruction came to an end with the compromise between the candidates Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes for President of the United States. They had a very close election in which it was agreed that Hayes would be the winner if federal troops were taken out of the South and the South went back to its old way of doing things. The Civil Rights Bill that Alonzo Ransier and others like him fought for was declared unconstitutional in 1883. And then some years after that, in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson made Jim Crow legal throughout the United States. And the year before that, in 1895, Benjamin Tillman, who was at that time the senator of South Carolina, he established his convention that undid the good work of the 1868 convention and made Jim Crow the law of the state of South Carolina. And Alonzo Ransier himself led to a very sad end. In his book, Up from Slavery, the great educator Booker T. Washington talks about coming to Charleston around the 1880 or so. And he recalled seeing a black man hauling bricks and people were yelling, "Hurry up, Governor! Hurry up, Governor!" And Booker T. Washington said, why do y'all call that man governor? And they said, oh, he used to be the lieutenant governor of this state. Mr. Ransier died in 1882. However, people like his great-great-granddaughter, Linda Rousseau, who's a very good friend of mine and a librarian at the Charleston Southern University, they tell his story for all who care to hear. And they try to keep his legacy alive, just as I do through books and stories and that type of thing. And his granddaughter, in fact, Lillian Ransier, had this to say about them. To do such things when there was so much prejudice was incredible. It should be taught to children now that they have so many more opportunities. And on September 27th, 1998, a historical marker was placed in front of his former home at 33 Pitt Street in Charleston, South Carolina, where it can be seen today, and his story can be told in my book, Voices of Black South Carolina, Legend and Legacy. So learn about Mr. Ransier and others like him so that you can be inspired to do equally great things. This is Damon Fordham.